Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. My name is Erich Kurschat. I am the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. I'm also the founder of HR Hot Seat, an inclusive mastermind community of real HR pros solving real HR problems. And we're doing that all online these days and all for free. And you can find out more about the HR Hot Seat community at hrhotseat.com. I am thrilled to have you here today for today's Harmony Insights lunch date. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. It is an experiment. It's something I'm nervous about. I'm just going to put it out there right off the bat. But I think that reinforces that this is worth doing and that this is worth trying. I'm really excited about this conversation. I will tell you a bit about the origin story of this. It was last summer at some point. It was a warm day. I remember that. It was very sunny. I was in shorts and a t-shirt walking back from a local grocery store here in the South Loop of Chicago with my wife. And I had just had what I felt was a pretty well-attended HR Hot Seat event. I facilitate our Chicago chapter, and we get up to 120 plus people at our events. And we had just had a really good event. And I was giving it some thought and thinking back to the number of people along the way that said, you know, Erich, I'm not sure if this whole HR Hot Seat thing is going to work. You are going to try to bring a whole bunch of people together for meaningful conversation, but you're not going to tell them in advance what the topics of conversation are going to be, and they're not really going to be sure who's going to be there. This sounds like a recipe for disaster. Clearly, the only reason why people would show up is that they know what they're going to talk about and they know who's going to be there. Yet suddenly we're running this organization, this HR community of people who were showing up in numbers that exceeded 120 people, having no idea until the event itself what was going to be discussed. And I thought that was pretty special. And then I started asking the question on this walk back from the grocery store, if that's possible, what else is possible? And you may know that's a very dangerous question to ask, because that opens the door wide up to trying new things and succeeding at some and failing at others. And but as soon as I had asked that question, it had to be answered. What else is possible? What am I hearing is not possible that may very well be possible? And I started thinking about this traditional panel discussion where people are selected in advance, and it's usually because they have a particular title or an area of expertise or a bio or a connection maybe to the host of the panel. And it feels very exclusive, and everybody gathers around and you get great information from the panelists, but it feels like a very one-way conversation at times. And I started thinking about then, how could the panel discussion be turned on its head a little bit, you know, where instead of feeling like an exclusive professional networking event, it's just as inclusive as our HR Hot Seat events are, that everybody shows up with equally valuable expertise, experience, and perspective. Some of the things that I have in the event description for today, all people are equally deserving of the spotlight, regardless of your title or your bio or whether or not you are currently employed, some things that are a little bit more superficial. All people benefit when they come together in support of and in service to one another. We prove that through HR Hot Seat. So how could these same tenets be worked into the panel discussion? You could call it disrupting it. You could call it just an innovative approach, a different non-traditional approach to panel discussions. But I thought this is an opportunity for us to try something new. And I really wanted to call it a pop-up panel. As soon as I had that in my mind, for me, whenever I brand something, I'm ready to go. The rest is going to follow. As soon as I come up with a catchy name or a logo or some sort of visual, I'm ready. The rest is going to follow. I'm ready to do it. So in my mind, last summer, pop-up panel was already a thing. I just had to come up with the chutzpah to do something about it, to make it happen and not keep it bouncing around in my head. And hopefully a lot of you who are participating today can identify in some way with that challenge. You have a great idea. I know I should be doing this. I know I can polish my LinkedIn profile. I know I can articulate my challenges when I'm interviewing for jobs better than I currently do. You know, I know that I can write this fantastic article, blog post that I put up on LinkedIn or elsewhere. I know I'm capable of doing it. I just have to do it. And after months of saying I just need to do it, this was the time to do it. So welcome to today's pop-up panel, the first ever pop-up panel on the topic of meaningful connection. I want to tell you how this is going to work today. I am going to, in a moment, ask you to put in the chat area if you would be willing to volunteer to be on the panel. This is the pop-up portion of it. You knew what the topic was going to be, but nobody knows what the panelists or who the panelists are going to be. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to volunteer to be on the panel, and I'm going to randomly choose 2 or 3 people to be on the panel. And then I'm going to ask you one of a few questions that I've identified and put in the description about the topic of meaningful connection. I'm going to ask, after some introductions, I'm going to ask, what does meaningful connection mean to you? How do you define it? I'm going to ask, what is a specific example of when you have personally struggled to connect meaningfully with others in the past? And what did you learn from the experience? I think talking about those struggles and failures, if you want to call them, along the way is a really important part of any discussion. And then finally, I may choose to ask, what is one piece of advice that you have for others who strive for meaningful connection? If our conversation gets inspiring, we may go in different directions as well, but I wanted to at least have a baseline. So those are the 3 questions that I want to ask of today's pop-up panelist. Just a couple of ground rules. You saw them in the description. Number 1, any panelist who wishes to step down may do so at any time for any reason without questions asked. I have been in a place where I volunteered to do something and then immediately regretted it for any reason. And so I don't want you to feel that you have to stay in the spotlight if for any reason you want to step out of it. So that is completely understandable. Number 2, there will be no selling from the stage. This is not an opportunity for anyone to get up and pitch their products or services. This is an opportunity for us, yet another, while we are physically distanced, to connect meaningfully with one another in a new and hopefully inspiring way. I really want these to catch on and become a thing. So fingers crossed, we'll see how that goes. And then lastly, not really a ground rule, but just an ask on my part. I want this to be a place of support. I want everybody who volunteers to serve on the panel to feel supported. I want you to feel supported simply by having chosen to attend this. I really want this to be a place where we can, again, connect meaningfully and feel inspired by one another, our peers, not necessarily specific subject matter experts that have been invited here, but our group of our peers, inspired to do our very best work, whatever that happens to be. We have some HR professionals, we have some people in job transition, and probably a very diverse crowd today. And I want everyone to leave feeling inspired to do their best work, however you define that. All right? So let's get started. Enough from me. At this point, if you are interested in volunteering to be one of our panelists today, could you make yourself known in the chat area? I will give you just a moment to do so. So Paul, Shandee, and Susan are going to be our 3 panelists. So the way I'd like to start this is first with introductions, very briefly. Obviously, we only have till 12:30 today, which is 18 more minutes. So just very briefly, Susan, if you would like to start, please unmute yourself and let us know who you are and what you do as succinctly as you are able.
Okay, great. I'll be very brief. I'm Susan Barbee. I'm a professional development and career coach, and I work with mid-level managers who are maybe in a company in a role that would like to, make a change. Something's not working and they want something to go better, or people who are between jobs and needing, guidance through a transition.
Wonderful. So, welcome, Susan. Susan, thank you for volunteering today. Paul LaLonde, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Paul LaLonde. Thanks, Eric. I'm a HR director for a large nonprofit in Chicago, and I like connecting and being here, so I'm glad you chose me, and I'm happy to connect with all these folks and learn more about them as well.
Excellent. We have a great group today, so I'm really excited about the conversation. And Shandee, tell us about you.
Yes, hi, I'm Shandee Ewert. I am currently in transition after a 10-year career in higher education administration. I'm looking to break into HR, and I have a knack for choosing the right time to transition in the middle of a pandemic.
And I love it. You were the only person I know named Shandee, so I will never forget that. Yeah, I'm never going to confuse you with somebody else. Well, as I mentioned, I have a couple of questions that I have planned. The first question I'd love to ask, and any one of the three of you can speak up. I won't necessarily choose our first respondent. What does meaningful connection mean to you? Who would like to take a stab at that?
Yeah.
Susan.
Yes. Well, I was really excited when I first saw the topic for today. I think I even sent you a note immediately or wrote a note into the registration form that, wow, this is really neat because it just really resonated for me, the whole concept of meaningful connection. And so what I did is I stepped back and thought, well, why is this so important to me? And so in that process, I really thought through it. And so I'll just share that my reflections really were that first, meaningful is the only kind of, connection that I really value. And so why is that? And what is that? And so two words came to my mind, which is authenticity of the connection and mutuality. So authenticity is, when both parties are bringing their full selves. It isn't just about self-promotion, but it's about interest in the other just as much as having yourself be heard. This makes a more powerful dialogue. And so those things were really important to me. And then finally, what it means to me is that it's sort of the foundational piece to really build a more important relationship with others that you can really turn to help each other. You have something to ask them, they need something, then you can help provide it in return. So it's really ways to look to build meaning and benefit in a way that's really more practical eventually. And so that kind of takes us from the social media level, which is a good place to start, and also a place to build into more of the 3D.
I like that you respond that way. I think an easy trap to fall into these days is to hit the connect button on LinkedIn or other places and say, okay, well, we're connected. We're good to go. That the connection has been made. And what you're painting is a picture of mutual benefit to say, well, it goes beyond pushing a button. It's getting to know one another and being of service to one another and really being intentional about what happens after the connect button has been pushed.
Yes, great.
Love it. Thank you. Shandee, what are your thoughts on how you define meaningful connection?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what Susan said, actually. And this is something that as I've been networking and building more connections during my transition, that, and I know I had a conversation, I think, in another lunch date group about this, of how do I make sure that I'm giving back to the connection as well and not just taking. And so I think that's something that I've really tried to emphasize in the connections that I've built, is what knowledge can I share and what stories can I tell as well while I'm learning from others who are generous enough to share their time with me. So I wholeheartedly agree with Susan on those points.
Excellent. Thank you, Shandee. And Paul, how about you? What's your take on meaningful connection?
Again, not to take away what either of them said, but I would say for me, it's about a two-way street, and it's always been more than just, it's like a deeper relationship. And the first time I actually heard meaningful connection was actually from you, probably many years ago when we first started, and that got me thinking how to use your networks, how to join into your networks on a different level than just, okay, I know these people and they're HR pros, or I know these people and they're pros in this sector, I'll rely on them if needed or whatever. It's more activeness, it's staying engaged with them, and on many levels being their friend and joining their family on some ways. And that's on the higher extreme versus the other extreme, which is they're just there and you'll call on them if you need them. But I think the meaningful connection is much more on the relationship stream of things.
And I think now is the time when we need it. I keep saying, and I keep hearing more than ever, that's common these days. And so I don't want to be too extreme about this, but I think in a time of physical isolation, that this meaningful connection really does become so important. And I think that's evidenced in a lot of the conversations that I'm having in my Harmony Insights lunch dates. I mean, if you look at the schedule we've had and some of the things coming up even next week, it is people are coming on to talk about how they can connect with and serve their audiences and be supported by them in very meaningful ways. I love a conversation next Friday is going to be with John Thurmond, who's one of the co-hosts of the HR Social Hour Half Hour podcast. It's a mouthful right there, talking about how we can nurture our relationships and in challenging times, new ways of nurturing our relationships. And I think that that's all about meaningful connection. Shandee, I'd like to come back to you for our second question, which is a specific example of when you've personally struggled to connect meaningfully, and if any lesson came out of it, what was that lesson?
Yeah, I would go back to several years ago in my first position where I was supervising entry-level professionals. So I had recently been promoted, so I was supervising the people who used to be my peers, last week. And I really wanted them to know that I was invested in them, that I wasn't going to take on a holier than thou attitude just because I had just been promoted or anything. So I made it my mission to make sure they felt personally and professionally supported, that I was connecting them to opportunities they want to be connected to, that I was recognizing them and doing all of these things. And so I poured a lot into that. And after a few months, I was noticing that I wasn't getting a lot of grace in terms of learning my new position. And so I talked with somebody who I could trust to be honest with me, somebody who I was now a level above. And I'm fortunate that she was saying, well, Shandee, you're investing in other people, but nobody feels like they know you. It's coming off as too cold, too robotic, too professional, because we're sharing these stories with you, but you're not sharing any stories about your personal life. And here I was thinking like, well, I want to make sure that I'm not boring them, or I'm not burdening them with my challenges or problems or whatever it is, or being unprofessional with sharing things about my life. And when trying to do that, I had swung too far in the other direction. And so I took that feedback and I started sharing more things, obviously, in ways that fit the culture and that were appropriate, but making sure that I was a real person to people, and I was sharing my stories better, and making sure that the focus was still on the people that I was supervising or managing, but being more open and more warm with my own stories. And that helped to foster a better connection. So I think I have learned ways better now to share my stories and finding value in that. And I think there's still nervousness around that because I want to make sure that I'm focusing on other people. Even today, when I volunteered for this panel, I messaged Erich separately and said, well, if other people volunteer, go ahead and prioritize them, and it's okay. And then he doesn't put me on the panel. So thank you for allowing me to challenge myself today and continue on this journey. But that's something that I learned and I continue to put into place.
It makes me think about the word vulnerability. And those of you who know Brene Brown know that this is an area of expertise for her in the research that she's done. But vulnerability can be scary, and learning to be vulnerable and tell your stories and let people know who you are can be scary. But at the same time, there's often no better way to make that meaningful connection than to allow people in, to the extent that it's appropriate for a given scenario or environment. So I appreciate you sharing that. Susan, learning moment for you, an example or scenario in which you had struggled to connect meaningfully in the past.
Yeah, well, I thought about this, and it came back to learning to workarounds to being more of an introvert than an extrovert. One of my favorite topics, Erich, we've both talked about this together, and I think back to when I was moving from another field, which was publishing, into HR. And so it was really it was more of a transformational move because it was so different and required a lot of things to go through. But the key thing is I had been comfortable in my old job and I didn't really need to network. I'd been there for a while and everything was going great. And then the whole industry started to wobble, if not shatter. So I decided, well, I better get out of here. So one of the things I had to learn was, wow, I really haven't kept up with a network. And I have some, but this is really a place I need to start. Immediately felt nervous, really worried. And God, I don't know how to network and I don't really like to make small talk. So how is this going to work? So from that fear, I was able to push through and just try to figure out ways to make it work for me. And I think I was able to do that. And so by pushing through it and learning how to have conversations that, given today's topic, really were more meaningful, because I wasn't interested in just talking about sports or, the weather. And that's probably where I was, kind of frightened away. But I realized I'm the one that has to start that conversation at that level, because that's what I want to talk to people about. So I found ways to kind of entree in, and I had to think about it in advance, because that's just the way sometimes I need to do it. Not a script, but I had to really think, how can I start talking to people in these networking meetings or groups where I can just comfortably get into a conversation that goes into a little bit more depth. And so that's what I started to do. And, there was more to it, but that was essentially how I really kind of persevered past something I was struggling with, to have more meaningful connection on the way that I needed to do it.
I like the intentionality there and the initiative that you took. You said, I can set the tone for how this conversation is going to go. One of my favorite questions, rather than what do you do, which reduces people to sort of their job function, or who do you work for, which means that you're only of value, number one, if you're working, and two, if you're working for a company that's meaningful to me. A question that I love to start with is, why do you do the work that you do? And suddenly you're setting that tone. You're being so much more intentional to say, okay, if this is a thing that's going to happen, if we're going to connect here, it's not going to be superficial. It's going to be meaningful. We're going to start out with something that's going to really inspire some unique conversation, as opposed to the same old scripted questions and responses that we're used to experiencing when we're networking with other folks.
And can I just respond quickly to something you just said, Erich? Right. And there were several things I came up with, but one of them you sort of touched upon is to make it meaningful, as I think several of us said, it needs to feel mutual. So the what do you do question, if you turn that around and you're really asking about them, then you're immediately helping that other person get engaged with you. And so the first questions I always start with, or ways to engage, is about them. Mm-hmm. And that was just, again, to feel more comfortable because of my introversion, but also to the rules of engagement. And so I love your example there of just finding other ways to start the conversation and get it immediately on a deeper level.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Paul, I'm going to jump ahead to our next question, given the time that we have left. What is one piece of advice that you have for others who strive for meaningful connection?
I would just say, and it just sounds so cliche, but I think it's extremely challenging for a lot of people to follow through with it. But it is literally just be yourself, honestly. Mm-hmm. Be unapologetically yourself, no matter who you are. I think it was Aristotle who said something like, if you can't be friends with everybody, and if you don't have any enemies, then you're not doing something right. So just starting with that, then not everyone's going to like you. So being yourself first and foremost will attract the folks who, in theory, you would hope that would be the ones that you would want to be around anyway. So you'd rather be hated for being yourself than being loved for being someone you're not. So that's just kind of, I think, where you should start out with. And again, I think it's easier to say that for a lot of folks than not, but that'd be my first thing. And then the other thing is just kind of putting yourself out there. Don't be afraid. And even if you are afraid, just do it anyway. And usually when you put yourself out there, good things will follow suit. Maybe not right away, maybe right away, but eventually they will.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I was actually going back and forth with a woman online the other night who had been criticized on social media for something she had posted, and was asking, is this going to reflect on me and my brand, this post or this comment that someone in her audience had made? And I remembered one of my favorite quotes is something like, the only way to not be criticized or to avoid criticism is to do nothing and say nothing and be nothing. And so
that was probably what I was thinking of. Aristotle quote. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good, excellent. Well, we're on the same page. I mean, you are the philosopher, the HR philosopher, quite literally. So I look to you for that stuff. So thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Shandee, I'm going to give you the final word here. What is your piece of advice that you would have for people who are looking to connect more meaningfully with others?
I think my answer to this comes from my personal passion for storytelling and hearing other people's stories. So I'm involved in the Chicago Storytelling Network, and I enjoy going to storytelling nights. I've only ever told one myself on stage just because I wanted to challenge myself to do it. But I enjoy those spaces and those podcasts because it gives you an opportunity to learn about people and backgrounds and industries and personal experiences that you would never have any frame of reference for. And it's made me more comfortable asking people those deeper questions like Susan and Erich were talking about earlier, and sharing an understanding that I would have no other way of gaining. So I mean, yesterday, a couple days ago, I attended an online storytelling webinar or podcast, and one of the people was talking about his experience being a mountaineering guide and some mistakes that he made. And, you know, I don't know anything about mountaineering, but if I ever talk to somebody who's very into hiking or mountain climbing, now I have a frame of reference that's not just reading an article about mountain climbing, but I have somebody's personal story and the feelings behind it, and I can engage in that conversation to a deeper level. Now, that's not everybody's cup of tea, is listening to people's stories, but I think if you're looking for that personal connection, you need that genuine interest in other people and their experiences and things that are different outside of your world. And so seeking other ways to gain that, whether that be through storytelling or going to, you know, a speaker on a topic that you would never typically be interested in, it gives you that wealth of knowledge to be able to engage in a way that you wouldn't normally. And so that's something that I found useful for myself.
A great note to end on. Thank you so much, Shandee. That's great advice. We're going to leave it at that. I want to respect your time. It's already 12:30. These things go by quickly. They're just meant to be a taste of what we're attempting together, without exhausting you, so that you can actually go into your afternoon inspired to do your best work rather than exhausted by the conversation that we've had, because this is some heavy stuff. First of all, I want to thank our three panelists today, Shandee, Paul, and Susan, participating in the first ever pop-up panel, hopefully of more to come. I'm not gonna sway you one way or another, but I was really inspired by this. Just think about what we did. We came together without having selected people ahead of time, marketed who was going to be speaking, you know, going into the details of our conversation. And those of us who were here got to witness for 30 minutes the perspectives of these three people whose perspective and experience is very valuable. And they didn't have to come to me ahead of time and say, well, I have this background and this bio and this title and I have these connections. This all happened on the spot, right? And it could have gone poorly. I'm biased, but I think that this was a fantastic conversation. If you also believe that this was a fantastic conversation, I ask two things of you, or even if you don't, and that's fine if you don't, I want your feedback either way. I would love for you to email everybody who's on this call. I would love for you to send me a quick email, Erich, ERICH, at harmonyinsights.com. Just tell me what you think. Good, bad, pros, cons. I want to hear it all because I value your feedback. And number two, if you think that this was valuable and you would like to see more of it, you were inspired in some way by what we did today, if you could go to LinkedIn and other social media and talk about it and share harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. Share, let's make up a hashtag, pop-up panel. I don't know if it's being used. We can appropriate it. Hashtag pop-up panel, I think sounds as good to me as anything else does. And talk about what we just did. I think that this could become something. I would like to do more of them myself, but I want to make sure I first hear from you that this was a valuable use of your time. And if it isn't, I want to know that as well. I'm open to everybody's feedback. Again, thanks to Shandee, Paul, and Susan for being our very first ever pop-up panelists. I hope you will come back next week for additional lunch dates that we have planned with some great guests. harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. In the meantime, stay healthy, stay encouraged, have a fantastic weekend, and I can't wait to see you again soon. This has been a lot of fun, everybody. Have a great afternoon.